Welcome back to the Unseen Podcast, a podcast dedicated to missing people, unresolved cases, and UK true crime. Today we are going to be exploring a case that's both mysterious and sad. Mother of two, Anne Law disappeared from her home in Newcastle in March 1973 and simply vanished. Her disappearance was so out of character that it made her family question what exactly had happened to her. A trial, and many years later, and we're still asking, what happened to Anne? This is a case that there is not much information about, but I read her story and just had to cover it. This episode contains descriptions that some listeners may find distressing, so listener discretion is advised. Copperas Lane is located in the area of Newcastle upon Tyne, close to the A1 motorway. It's just around a 10-minute drive and a distance of 4 miles to Newcastle city centre. Copperas Lane was also where 34-year-old Anne Law lived with her family in 1973. She lived with her husband Gilbert and her 2 children, Trevor, 9, and Joanne, 5. The couple had been married for 11 years by 1973, and Gilbert worked as an engineer in the Merchant Navy. Anne was a devoted mother, and she was close to her twin sister Margaret, who reportedly resembled her so closely it was difficult to tell them apart if you didn't know them. To an outside observer, it appeared that the family were getting along well, however this was not the full story. Despite still living together, Anne and Gilbert's relationship had not been good for a while, and the pair had decided to get a divorce. They had decided to live together until the divorce officially came through. While the situation was not ideal, it was necessary for the children, and Anne and Gilbert continued to live under the same roof, waiting for the divorce decree which was due in April of 1973. March 24th, 1973 was a Saturday, and Anne had made plans for the Sunday with her sister. She was going to go round to see her, and then the pair were going to take the children to the beach together. The weekend would have also marked Anne and Gilbert's 11th wedding anniversary. That Saturday was initially like any other, and it's reported that Anne had a neighbour over that evening for a coffee. The neighbour left at about 7:50 that evening, and she later explained that she didn't see anything amiss that night, and Anne did not appear any different than usual. Despite this, it's reported that in the next couple of hours, Anne disappeared. The next account of what happened that night came from Gilbert. He later stated that at around 9:30 that evening, Anne told him that she couldn't just sit in the house all night, and he simply said that she got up and left the house without any explanation. The next day, Anne's sister Margaret was expecting her to arrive at her house with the children. When the time that they had arranged came and went, Margaret began to become worried about her sister. It was unusual for her to miss a meeting that they had arranged, and it immediately concerned her. By the afternoon, Margaret had decided to go round to Anne's house to see if she was there. She was greeted by Gilbert at the door, and Margaret asked him if Anne was at home. She later explained that Gilbert said that she wasn't there, and he assumed that she was at her house. Margaret confirmed she was not, and she explained that Gilbert appeared surprised by this. Gilbert explained what had happened the night before, and that Anne had left the house. Margaret stated that she knew when Anne had not arrived at her home that day that something must have been wrong, and she later described it as a premonition that she had that Anne was in trouble. When Anne did not return to the house or contact her sister, Margaret decided that she needed to contact the police. When the police became involved in the missing person investigation, it seemed that they also agreed with Margaret. Anne's disappearance was baffling. Why had she decided to leave on that Saturday evening and just not return? Had she simply left her 2 children behind? Police began their investigation at Anne's home and tried to establish when she had left and what she may have taken with her. It's reported that Anne had taken very little with her when she'd left. It was thought that she had left with the clothes she was wearing and had taken around £75 with her. She did not, however, take any clothes, personal items like cosmetics, and she didn't even take her handbag with her. Crucially, it became apparent that she had also set off on foot and did not take the family car to get wherever she had planned to go that night. Anne was described as wearing a dusty pink trouser suit along with a navy blue leather coat which came just above her knee. This description must have come from either Gilbert or from a combination of Gilbert and the neighbour who had come round to have coffee with Anne a couple of hours before she disappeared. These were the only two people to have seen her that evening. There was not much for the police to go on, and while Anne had the right to walk away from her life as an adult, they knew that it didn't seem like her to leave the children. The investigation was led by Detective Inspector Gordon McMurtry from Newburn CID, who questioned family members and friends about where they thought Anne might be. These interviews provided detectives with some information about a previous time that Anne had left the family home. Around 3 years prior, Anne had left and visited an aunt's house in Essex, on this occasion to get away from the pressure that she was feeling at home and in her relationship. She returned to her children 2 days later, and it was reported that she had taken them to live with Margaret before she'd left. Margaret discussed this with the Newcastle Evening Chronicle on the 30th of March 1973, stating, "My sister is not in the habit of disappearing like this. That visit to Essex was the only time in 11 years when she left her children. She would always bring them to me." This provided police with some information about Anne's background, however this did not necessarily help in the investigation. It did show that Anne had left the home previously, however she had returned soon after, and according to her sister Margaret, had made sure that the children were taken care of before leaving. The fact that Anne had left without many of her belongings and no extra clothing indicated to police that she had not intended to be gone for as long as she had been. Inspector McMurtry stated in an article on the 28th of March that her behaviour is completely out of character. She would never have left her 2 children. Margaret also appealed to the newspapers, stating, "She may have just wanted to get away from everything for a time, but if this was the case, she would have ensured the children were being cared for." The detectives were sure that she had not just walked away from her life voluntarily, so the question was, what had really happened to Anne? While they circulated Anne's description, the detectives decided to focus on items from the Law family home. In the few days since Anne's disappearance, Margaret had taken on the role of looking after Anne's 2 children, Joanne and Trevor, while Gilbert had gone back to live at his parents' house in Lady Kirk Road, just over 2 miles away. Before Gilbert went to live there, however, police had visited the family home and taken away their car. It was taken away for forensic tests to establish if it had had anything to do with Anne's disappearance. Gilbert also spoke to the Newcastle Evening Chronicle where he discussed his wife's disappearance. He explained, "Saturday night happened to be our 11th wedding anniversary. She said she was not going to sit in the house all night, and then she walked out." He stated that he believed Anne was in London, saying, "She went there a few years ago." In the early investigation, however, police continued to say that they were keeping an open mind about Anne's disappearance, as there was not enough evidence to prove what had actually happened. Police asked Margaret to pose for a picture wearing similar clothes to those that Anne was thought to have been wearing that Saturday evening. This was then circulated in the Newcastle Evening Chronicle in the hope that someone may remember seeing her that night. One of the poignant moments in the days after the disappearance was that the divorce decree for Anne and Gilbert's marriage came through just a few days later. As March turned into April, the police continued to be baffled by Anne's disappearance, and there had been no sign of her during this time. The detectives issued numerous appeals to local newspapers to ask for Anne to get in touch with them. However, they also stated that they believed that the disappearance was very out of character. Gilbert had reportedly been helping police with the investigation and had spent 2 hours speaking with them. He spoke to the People newspaper on the 1st of April, saying, "I have told them all I know. I'm terribly concerned. So are the police. They have taken a statement from me. This is the 3rd time that our marriage has been at the point of breaking up. The first time my wife talked of divorce, I managed to talk her out of it. 4 years ago, she made up her mind to seek a divorce and went off to Southend to complete her plans. I brought her back and again persuaded her to change her mind. Gilbert was openly concerned about Anne's disappearance, but also explained that it was not necessarily the first time that she had left the family home. Gilbert decided to go back to sea to his job, and Margaret continued to look after the children and tried to get as much publicity for Anne as she could. Time passed in the case with no sign of Anne, and the police maintained that they were still actively looking for her and trying to uncover new evidence. In April 1975, police once again renewed the hunt for Anne and decided to again interview Gilbert. They arrived at the family home in Copperas Lane and took him to the police station. He was interrogated for 6 hours from morning until the late afternoon, and it's reported that he was once again asked about Anne's disappearance and what had happened that night. Gilbert spoke to the Newcastle Journal on the 5th of April, discussing the interrogation. He said, "There is still a stigma, a suspicion hanging over me. I know police think that she is probably dead and that I had something to do with it. All I can do is protest my innocence. They told me that there had been an important development and I should confess to killing her. It was a grilling I'll never forget." The police, however, denied that they believed there had been a development, and Detective Superintendent Brian Johnson stated, "We would still be interested in finding out anything about her disappearance. We only questioned Mr. Law to see if there was any change in the situation. Anyone who was connected with Anne when she disappeared comes under the degree of suspicion." There were multiple appeals put out during the 1970s, and rewards were offered by local people in the hope that she may be found. Sadly, there was no sign of Anne, and she did not return to her home. The fear was that something had indeed happened to Anne, as it was clear that she could not have created a new life for herself with only the objects she took with her that day. It was also evident from the information that the police had been given by Anne's family and friends that she would not have left her children in the manner that she did. In 1982, new information came out about Anne's case. This information would finally give some hope that her case would be solved. In November of that year, the police began digging along the River Tyne at Bywell near Stocksfield, around 13 miles from Anne's home. It's reported that the police had dug a trench around 30 feet long and 5 feet deep, while detectives had brought in specially trained sniffer dogs to aid with the search. This search had come about after information had been given about the possible location of Anne's body. Unfortunately, no evidence was found during this search. However, it was soon confirmed that the information had reportedly come from Gilbert himself after questioning by police. Following on from this information, he was quickly arrested and charged with Anne's murder almost 10 years after she disappeared. News that Gilbert had been arrested hit the headlines, and for many it caused distress and disgust that Anne's husband may have been the one who had killed her. For some, it explained how she had disappeared without a trace, and evidently Gilbert had been the last person to see her. He immediately protested his innocence and got a lawyer to defend him. Gilbert's lawyer, Mr. Alan Finlay, spoke to the Newcastle Evening Chronicle on the 15th of December 1982. He explained that Gilbert had been seen digging in the area of the River Tyne, and when he was spotted doing this by police, he was arrested and charged. Finlay said that Gilbert suffered from schizophrenia and was on medication to treat it. He explained that Gilbert had become obsessed with being reunited with his wife and imagined that she had been buried on the banks of the River Tyne. He also said that following his arrest, Gilbert was interviewed for 3 days, where he allegedly described how he had killed Anne and how he had buried the body. Finlay, however, said that he had not had access to his medication during this time, and his mind had wandered even further. Finlay also provided some new information, saying that Gilbert had been sent a letter from a Mr. Nightingale in Eastbourne, and that he had spotted Anne in both Eastbourne and London. Finlay said that this could prove that she is still alive, stating, "It would be an absolute disaster, a catastrophe for her husband who is charged with her murder, if she were in fact alive and well. I have been concerned from the beginning of this affair about the weight of evidence." The police, however, were satisfied with the evidence, and the prosecution opposed Gilbert's bail application. Mr. Derek Brown for the prosecution said, This is a case of murder alleged to have been by the accused on his wife. It took place some considerable time ago, and it came to light in November of this year, when the accused was seen digging by the side of the river at Bywell. As a result of that, the accused was seen by police officers, and at first he made admissions which amounted to digging for the body of his wife in the sand there. In the months after Gilbert was charged with murder, a number of strange stories began to emerge about his behaviour. During a committal hearing in May 1983, it was heard that Gilbert had told a number of people different stories about what had happened to Anne. He told his nephew that he and Anne had tried to drink themselves to death on the night that she went missing. He couldn't do it, but Anne did, and he buried her body at Stocksfield. On another occasion, he had asked his son Trevor to come with him to dig near the river to try and find his mother. They didn't find anything after digging for 25 minutes. He had also reportedly told his second wife that he had buried her after she took some tablets. Mr. Finlay, Gilbert's lawyer, used these differing stories to show that his client was a paranoid schizophrenic and did not know what he was admitting to. He said that Gilbert had once claimed to be Jesus Christ and had been seen sunbathing in his coat and hat. He explained that the prosecution had no proof of death and that their searches in that area along the river had not produced any evidence. He said there was no case to answer. Despite the statements made by Gilbert's lawyer, he was still committed for trial in Anne's murder. During the trial at Newcastle Crown Court in 1984, witnesses who knew Anne and Gilbert testified, including Anne's sister Margaret and some of their neighbours. The neighbours testified that Anne had seemed in jovial spirits and did not seem like someone who wanted to drink herself to death, as Gilbert had claimed in his statement to police. Neighbours also came forward to explain that they'd heard strange thudding noises in the basement of the house at around 10 p.m. on the night that Anne disappeared. This, crucially, was half an hour later than Anne had allegedly left the house. A waterboard worker, who was also a witness at the trial, explained how he'd been working near Bywell, close to the river, when he noticed a car parked up close by. A man got out carrying a woman in his arms. He said the man appeared strong as he didn't seem to have any trouble taking the woman out of the car. He said he assumed the woman may have been disabled and needed some help. They went into the wood. He came out about 10 minutes later with nothing in his arms. The man got into the car and left. He said he went to the area where the man had been parked, but the woman was nowhere to be found. He noticed one of the sand dunes had been excavated and there were some footprints around it. He said he didn't think much to it, however, as he assumed the woman had been put back into the car while he was working, and he hadn't noticed. He only thought to let police know what he had seen when he heard that they were digging in that exact area. The crucial thing was, however, that despite Gilbert's actions and these witnesses' testimonies, police had been unable to find any evidence or Anne's body by the riverbank. Gilbert's defence stressed this at trial and once again explained that he suffered from a mental illness that made him vulnerable to making things up. Gilbert pleaded not guilty to the charges that were against him. On the 29th of June 1984, the trial came to a conclusion and the jury came to a verdict. They found him not guilty of the murder of Anne Law. After 11 years of heartbreak for Anne's family, they yet again did not get any answers or justice in her case. Gilbert walked free from court, proclaiming his innocence. By law, Gilbert was now an innocent man, and could escape the questioning he had faced since 1973. It was clear that despite his confession to the police, there was a lack of real tangible evidence to prove that Anne was dead. No body cases are of course notoriously difficult to prosecute and to prove. Sadly, Anne has never been found, and there has been no sign of her since her disappearance. What happened to Anne that night? The little evidence that exists appears to prove that she left her home with no real belongings and nothing that could help her create a new life. It does not seem that she intended to be away for that long. So did Anne leave the house that night to get away from it all? Did she come across someone who wanted to harm her? If that's the case, where is her body and why is it not yet been found? The other theory is that Anne did leave her life behind and started a new one. If this was the case, why has there been no trace of her since? And why has nobody seen her? The other theory that some people still believe is that Gilbert was in some way involved in Anne's murder. This is what was pointed to at trial, but of course he was found innocent in the courts. Whatever happened to Anne, it's certain that her family, and particularly her 2 children, deserve to know what happened and deserve to get justice for her. I hope that new information emerges in this case, and I hope that answers can eventually be found. Thank you for listening to today's episode. This is a case that has not gained much public attention since it occurred, and I really would love some progress to be made on it. Please let me know your thoughts. Thank you to everyone that continues to support the podcast by leaving us a 5-star review wherever you listen, and thank you to all our Patreon supporters. Thank you to our amazing new patron, Penny Wilson. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can get shout-outs in the show, stickers, postcards, and access to bonus episodes. The link is in the show notes. Please follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can also join our Facebook discussion group. If you want to suggest a case for future episodes, you can contact me on social media or email me at theunseenpod@gmail.com. As always, I'm Caprice, and this has been Unseen.